Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Critical Thinking Live, Friends of Europe's online discussion space where we bring you leaders, influencers, thinkers from across the public, private and civil society sectors. It's a great pleasure for us today to re-welcome Ashish Kumar Gupta, a senior representative of HCL, Executive Vice President that covers a number of regions and has been at the helm of HCL Technologies that has, in his patch during his tenure, has seen the company grow and do amazing things. In particular, it's worthy of note that part of his work when he's been in the last 4 years, that he's created partnerships with Cambridge Service Alliance, which includes a partnership with Manchester United. Who'd have thought? It gives me great pleasure to welcome Ashish to this conversation. Today's subject is about India and Europe, two huge marketplaces, two places where there's a belief in liberal-minded democracies, two markets where there's clearly been a lot of synergy, there's a lot of history, but in the hope to create better trading relationships, despite something called the FTA that was created well over nearly a decade ago, stalled. It stalled because the give and take didn't reach a harmony. For example, the EU wanted more tax or let's say duty on foods and other matters, cars, etc. And India wanted more in terms of access to the free market in Europe. What we have now seen is a re-emergence of that relationship, that discussion to create and agree a free trade agreement, and now there's been creation of a technology and trade council between the EU and India. So I'm going to bring in a private sector perspective. That's why we have Ashish Kumar Gupta with us. Ashish, it's very well welcome to have you with us again.
Thank you, Dharmendra. It's absolutely a pleasure to sort of re-talk on this forum, right? And it's a great work which you guys are doing around sort of bringing all these strategic topics and sort of getting a wide variety of views. So thank you for inviting me in.
Thank you very much. So we were particularly keen to hear from you, Ashish, given what HCL is about. It's a leading edge, new kind of operation, if you like, in terms of creating a suite of support on the latest technology for enterprises. And you operate in 52 countries. Your annual turnover is over 11.5 billion, and you have seen market access improve for you across the piece. However, when we think about India and Europe, I explained, a little bit about the stalling of agreements. Do you feel that in recent times that things have changed for the positive? Do you see signs of progress in terms of the sticking points that were there before, in terms of EU-India trade and technology or digital relations?
Mm-hmm. So, obviously all of us sort of understand that actually the trade and technology FTA, or the technology of the FTA, which was supposed to be done between EU and India, got stalled, right? Almost about 9-10 years back. And, and now it's actually sort of back on track, and it's something which both India and the EU are extremely keen to make progress on. So in my mind, actually, the things which are driving this forward is the fact that the Indian economy is only going to become larger and larger in the context of the world economy, right? Roughly about $2.5 billion today, $1 trillion today, getting to about $8 trillion in 2030 and about $30 trillion, expected by 2050. So in the context of that and the context of the fact that there's so much in common between the EU and and India, right? I believe there is lots and lots of areas of convergence, right? There are obviously significant areas of divergence, right, between the different positions which the FTA got stalled in. But I think that the areas of convergence and the areas in which the EU and India can actually do more, right, have only increased, right? And they will, in my mind, continue to increase. And if we just sort of take it from that lens, I suppose that the time for the FTA and the Technology Trade Council is absolutely right. How does it pertain to digital? I think all of us sort of understand that digital is going to become a larger portion of what's going to start driving economies. In fact, there's a sort of study, I think, which the EU commissioned, and almost about 14% increase in GDP could be, could be forthcoming if EU were to invest in the right set of technologies over the next 5-7 years. Right, a lot of that is something which India will have a very important role to play on, and that is what I think are the areas which we need to sort of converge on. So there are more areas of intersection which are combining together, which are common for both parties, and I think as long as we sort of focus on those and make those gain more velocity, right, especially in the technology area, I think we will jointly benefit both the EU and the Indian position. There'll be some areas where I suspect the convergence will be still difficult to get.
I see, because it's interesting. On Independence Day, Prime Minister Modi commented that this is India's decade, which he's known for his sound bites. But he sets out very clearly the ambition. But he also very clearly supporting a Made in India approach. So I think the politics around this relationship are writ large. And we know the economics are too. India will have the largest middle class across the globe in less than 5-7 years. Yeah. So one of the things that occurs to us, and to me in particular, what I'd like to hear from you is that how can the EU maximize the relationship with players like yourself and other big technology and private sector stakeholders in the digital space to maximize the benefit of this huge marketplace in India? But actually, when we look at import and export, both regions, if you like, need each other in terms of being the pit stop between East and West.
Yeah. So, see, the way to think about it is, I was just looking over the numbers, right, of trade between EU and India, right? And actually, it's very surprising that actually there is a very good balance of trade between the EU and India, both on goods and on services, right? There's hardly, hardly any major gaps, right? Just 5-7% here or there in either of those two streams, right? But what was very interesting to note is that the direct investment from the EU into India has jumped multifold, right? What does that tell you? It essentially sort of tells you that actually the private enterprises, which is what we largely sort of work with in the European Union, are actively sort of aware of the opportunity which India presents, right? And they are now making themselves, more and more relevant to the India market, right? So I suspect that what's going to happen over the next few years is that all the customers I work with in the European Union will find India more and more attractive. Hence, FDI is going to increase, and our ability to help them scale India, right, and make the most of the opportunity which is being presented there will only continue to increase. Right. The second thing is that, as large, IT services players in the European market, what we've done over the last, I would say, 15-17 years that I've been in Europe, is we've largely catered to the enterprise segment of the market. Those are the people who've been sort of consuming our technology services, and we made them more and more efficient, more and more competitive in the market in which they play. Over the next 10 years, I see that almost all Indian IT services firms are going to start working extensively in helping governments and the larger sort of ecosystem to become more, technology savvy, right? So I think the partnership between EU and India on technology and technology-related trade is only going to increase because if 14% of the, let's say, growth in GDP is going to come through technology-led, investment and growth, then I don't see a situation where you can sort of not take advantage of the significant talent pool which India presents, especially in the new age technologies. In fact, we have some sort of a study which says that almost 60% of the new age technologies which are coming around, right? There's a huge amount of talent which is actually getting generated out of India. And the combination of that is, in my mind, going to continue to have equitable balance of trade between the two countries. or the two regions, and it's only a sort of win-win, if I were to say, if we sort of work together more collaboratively and get these two markets to sort of have lesser friction in some ways.
Indeed, but at the end of the day, it's politics and regulations. And there's no doubt about what you say. If you look at the world now, in terms of the Indian diaspora, it's most of the global tech superpowers have Indians at the top of them. Banks, international institutions, etc. So and so forth. Indians are have been on the rise in the past, let's say 20 years in particular, and we've seen that growth. And as you say, it's actually 75% of the world's advanced technology talent resides in India. 75%. That's amazing, right? And we know what that means for Europe. And Europe needs that talent for its future economic growth. Yeah. So how do we ensure that players like yourself can create opportunities for more engagement and other private sector partners to engage in the Trade and Technology Council so you can influence matters for the better?
So, I would say over the last 15 odd years, right, the growth of European business in India and the growth of Indian business, especially the tech business in Europe, has been, despite the government, if I may to sort of use the words, right? Over the next, I would say 10, 15 years, I see that, regulation / the role of government in how technology is going to get used is only going to increase, right? And therefore, I think it makes a lot of sense that, while you have public sector, people and diplomats and so on and so forth debate trade at a more macro level, right? When it starts coming to how do we get the markets in Europe which consume technology and people like us who have the ability to deliver this technology, right? We should have a fair share of voice, as it were, in sort of saying what is it that are the de-accelerators and what are the accelerators which we can help influence. So, for example, I've been a very strong advocate that, rules, if they are common across digital markets and you have one common digital market, that's a great place to be, right? No matter what the rules are, how tough the rules are, but if they are common rules, right, and they enable digital markets to be more combined than more fragmented, it's something which is going to only produce good for the larger world, right? So there are areas such as that, which is where I think people like us should be able to contribute to how the sort of trade between Europe and India increases, especially in relation to the movement towards digital. And I think COVID proved to all of us, right? We are in a world where over the next 5, 7, 10 years, you're going to see more and more of the economy move to online, move to digital, right? And there are many intersection points, especially I would say between India and EU. Now, if you were to think about the internet, you got the Chinese internet and you got in some ways the American internet, right? And there are two very different models. But, the EU has been crafting its own place, right? In terms of, what tech, regulation looks like, what tech for good looks like. And on the other hand, India has been also carving its own space in terms of the India stack, right? The set of services which is making India like the largest payment, online payment or digital payment market in the world, right? Or the largest digital identity market in the world, right? So a combination of this, in my mind, could actually produce a completely new type of internet, something which is more sort of more regulated in areas where the regulation needs to be, something which is, at scale. And the only request, from players like us is, if you're part of the dialogue, then hopefully we can provide a basis for which fragmentation becomes lower and lower. That is where the sort of economic benefits are going to accrue to both parties significantly as part of this negotiation.
So just draw on that point there, because it's really interesting that one of the key issues that is going to, I suppose, chart the future of this relationship is about free flows of data, privacy and regulation, right? And we know that in India, there's a particular greater appetite, as we've seen, for more localized approach and for protecting data that's local. We've seen that the recent new bill that was going to be seen as being kind of leveling up, if I can call it that, to European standards without being patronizing, has been stalled, has been pulled out. And there's a hope that by October, there'll be new plans in place. And we know that, June of this year, the EU has already set out its plans for a potential FTA in the future. And we're now waiting with bated breath in terms of India's response and proposition, which I think will come out later this month or early next month. A company like you that operates multinationally, right? Aren't you the pathfinder for being able to persuade parties on both sides that actually, if you get the ability to operate freely in this way and access markets, you could see the benefits, or rather not, of being able to adopt regulation and compliance measures that are across 52 countries, and you've managed to do it. How can you, as a company and other players like you, I suppose, create different dialogues? And is it through the Technology Council or other measures so you can say, actually, enabling us as a company to operate the way we are with shared regulatory frameworks is only good for the world economy?
No, I completely agree with you. Actually, I think the Trade and Technology Council, which has been set up, it's a great thing, right? And, that is where I think players like us need to be participating to essentially, enable both of the sort of, trading parties in some ways to develop the mechanisms which are going to enable, a better proliferation of technology, which is, bounded by common rules, right? So so the vision I have is, the tougher rules on privacy, tougher rules on compliance, right? Tougher rules on human rights. All of those are absolutely perfect, right? In some ways, data nationalization or data localization is something where I almost assume that is really where the world is going. So I'm not so worried about free flow of data, honestly speaking, right? Because that's the way we've sort of operated. So I'm not worried about free flow of data. What I am really worried about is that we are going to get a million, different, regulations to comply with, which makes the life of our customers and us, right, in meeting to those standards extremely difficult, right? So common rules, right? The digital market, integrates more seamlessly between, the European Union and India. If the integration happens more seamlessly, the rules are common, right? And we have a converged, set of regulations, right? All of that is going to yield more, in my mind, than a lot of debate and discussions around, this is what I want to do and this is what I don't want to do. Data localization, in my mind, is going to happen globally, right? We saw it in China, we saw it in Australia, we've seen it, even within EU, the personal data, right, and the sensitivity around that is very different in Germany than some other location, right? So data localization, in my mind, is a trip point which everybody sort of gets into, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the most important issue, right? The most important issue is commonality of standards and commonality of how we make these standards enable a more coherent and a more seamless digital market, right? It's got very different characteristics to how the physical market is, which is really trade in good, and even trade in services is very physical right now, right? But you're going to see more and more of this turn into digital services, right? And that is where I would say commonality of framework is really going to enable both of the EU and India to get to a very different level of sort of collaboration using tech.
No, I take your point about localization, because honestly, when we see the pace of technological development, we know that data becomes absolutely essential. It can be capitalized, monetized. It becomes a rich source, if you like, of intelligence for a number of reasons. But privacy, right, is at the core of this, standards for privacy. And the whole, we know that the EU, despite any of its other misgivings and failings, the GDPR model has been a gold standard, if you like, in creating an opportunity for, let's say, consumers, citizens to feel potentially safer, in that there are regulations there to ensure protection of data and enabling companies to have to think long and hard about what they do in terms of accessing people's data and protecting it, if you like. Now, I understand that you're saying that what we need is a framework that's standardized. But how much about the privacy of data, the GDPR model, do you think has any traction in terms of the approach in India?
So I'm not a data expert per se, especially in relation to data regulation and data laws and so on and so forth. But I'm a very strong, supporter of the European GDPR, mindset of how data for me needs to be sort of managed and controlled, right? So, all of us as individuals, we love our privacy, right? And, the data, therefore, which different technology companies hold for me, I would want it to be treated with the same degree of respect, right? And I would want it to be localized to only the context of this. So in my mind, the world is converging more and more towards the European GDPR, right? The Indian model will also converge to the same level of standards, right? I think India is only sensitive about, Indian data being used to sort of, trained algorithms at scale, right?
Yes.
And get exported out of India. So I would say, if I living in the UK, right, and as the sort of deserve a certain degree of privacy and a certain degree of this, so does sort of citizen sitting in India, right? And hence the commonality of the laws, commonality of how we sort of approach it is really what's more important than just having many laws with just the same end being achieved ultimately, in my mind.
No, indeed. So as we move towards, looking at what might happen this autumn, right? So this autumn will be key in terms of both parties sharing information about, the red lines potentially, but there's a real desire, and that's the fact that the Trade and Technology Council has been established clearly shows the importance of India and its geopolitical position for Europe and the West. That's self-evident. Do you see the opportunity to put in place some specific measures, or what kind of measures would you like to see as we move towards potential agreements? So in terms of the Trade and Technology Council, what kind of specific mechanisms would you like to see in place as a private sector multinational? And what are some of your peers wanting from this also?
So the like I said, the area where I think all of the HCL and its peers, right, where we've done very well, is we've done brilliantly in terms of going to your private enterprises, right, and telling them how we could actually enable them to be more sort of competitive using technology, right? That's really what we've done in the last 7 or 8 or 10 years, right? And in the process, I would say, HCL, for example, has about 10,000 people in the EU, which we now employ in different countries, right? In fact, we are running short of talent across all the sort of markets where we've got significant amount of investments done, like in Poland or and places like that, right? So what I'd look to do is deepen this relationship from just the private sector, which is really happening on its own steam, right, to also start including all of the technology initiatives which different governments take, and all of the things which we are starting to see in EU in specific around things like the sovereign cloud, right? So given the geopolitical context of where we are, industrial security or industrial assets are going to become more and more targeted, right? And hence the sort of the non-trade barriers, as it were, for somebody from India to start, helping, improve those are, in my anticipation, only going to increase over the next 5-7 years, right? So we need to solve for that. We need to say, how can the talent which we have and the competency which we have, which powers the best companies in Europe, enable you to have the geopolitical and strategic posture which you want on the critical assets, right? But we continue to help you in driving that change, right? The second area is citizen services, right? Citizen services empowered through technology is an area which is, significant potential for improvement and significant potential for scale, right? There's significant amount of work which we could do between the EU and all the technology service providers in terms of bringing that to bear, right? The third area which I think is very, very important is in some ways, you said 75% of the new age technology talent is sort of, India centric. Now, you have such a large amount of brilliant universities across the EU, right? And they're producing absolutely brilliant engineers, a lot of which we hire, but we are running out of those engineers. More collaboration at that layer, right, is another area where I suspect there is huge amount of potential for gain, right? So there's lots which we do, when we hire any engineer from any college, right, whether it's in India or whether it's in the West, we have to invest about a year's worth of effort, right, in training these people to be able to deploy themselves in, customer organizations, right? So that's the amount of investment which we need to make. So there's a lot which I think the technology service providers can help in improving the outcome from where the universities are producing engineers and how these people are actually better suited for the needs of industry. So there are some very strong intersection points between India and the EU in specific, right? Around how do we, strengthen our technology relationship. These are just three which I'm sort of pointing out. Regulation, if it's common, if it's synchronized, just enables us significantly because we don't have to then worry about a million different things in 100 places. We can just be very clear. These are the standards which we're following, and then just apply that across the initiatives which we have.
I think there's an excellent point, and I think it's particularly interesting that you're saying what you're saying around customer services or customer public services, basically e-government, and the opportunity of e-government is really very significant, especially when you think about the learning exchange between how it's developed in the UK or in Germany or France, etc., across Europe, but also how it's being developed in India. So there's a real opportunity, isn't there, for the private sector to create that bridge, if you like, but the market for that is significant. But I'm also taken back positively by your idea of the university frameworks and the university networks between India and Europe. And there's real scale and scope there for looking at that talent. And is that kind of conversation happening in the council, do you think? About using, you just come up with very clear, the kind of standard regulatory framework everybody wants, absolutely, and it should be an element of passporting between the markets, if you like, that benchmark approach to a framework that's standardized. But in terms of this e-government approach, feels very new and very different in terms of the potential co-benefits between India and Europe, but then also this last point about the talent that's within the higher education pool. India's going to produce 200 million STEM graduates every year, almost. And so, there's something about that. And that India is going to become one of the world's largest electronics manufacturing industry. I think it's going from like 75 billion right now up to 300 billion by 2025-26. So the opportunities are vast for that, bringing together the wealth of talent that's actually coordinated and made the most of. So do you get a sense that these are the two frontiers potentially where we might push and nudge a different kind of agreement?
Yeah, I think so. See, these are the areas where I would like for the EU and India to, converge more, actively, right? We just have the strategic intent that this is an area where the level of differences in many ways are not as much as, let's say, with agriculture, for example, right? Then I think it makes sense to sort of divide the whole problem into the areas where we have the ability to accelerate, right? And find a way to accelerate, on common convergence points. I think all the topics which we just discussed, right? Whether it's around the, helping all your sort of strategic sectors, helping in the e-governance, environments, helping with regards to, scaling up talent, right? The next generation talent across EU, right? These are all areas which should be part of that, Technology and Trade Council, and something which we should find a way to accelerate, because that's going to yield a huge amount of benefit to both parties in a very short period of time, right? And I take that approach, take the common points of convergence, really push them hard, right? Get common rules, common frameworks, right? And sort of accelerate the collaboration between the EU and India. It's already growing organically quite a bit, but just getting more strategic intent behind it can actually push it to a completely different level.
Thank you. It's very insightful, very thoughtful, because I think you've touched that point where the areas of convergence, especially where both markets need each other. There's a sense of arrogance on both parties to a certain extent, that do we really need each other? When you think of what Ambani is doing with 5G, when you think about the digital stack in India, India could just suddenly turn around and say, well, I've got enough. I have a huge market and I can be a big global player in Asia. But actually Europe could equally say, our values are important. We want to make sure that actually we continue to be the value setter in the world. Yet demographics, change in the world, geopolitics means both parties need each other. And Asia, India has the potential to change the geopolitical relationships in Asia and be the alternative partner to the West in balancing relations with China potentially. I mean, I know that I don't want to ask you a political question here, but in terms of, as we wrap this conversation up, it'd be really interesting to have your foresight, your thinking out of the box, if you will, that we know recent events have meant that India becomes more important geopolitically in the Asia region, if I can call it that. But there are demographics and data, as we've just been discussing this conversation, that make the inevitability of India's rise as as an economic superpower absolutely undeniable. And so there's a sense that this middle class in India, we know that's growing, will want to be in Europe. They will want their children to come to school here or university, and vice versa. I wonder if there's, when we look at the projections, what kind of issues do you think both parties should really focus on, in addition to what you said, but also where you think this relationship and the geopolitics might be heading? Difficult question, I know.
See, the way I look at it is that, we are moving obviously to a more multilateral world, right? More sort of segregated blocks, as it were, versus a uniform whole, right? So we're starting to get into slightly more, restricted lanes and, foes versus friends, right? That sort of a environment is what we are entering into geopolitically, and that's going to only strengthen, I suspect, over the next 30 years. I don't see that actually, going back to normal global, one uniform way of working, right? The fact that India is going to continue to become more and more of an economic superpower, right? And hence very important for, almost all global companies to win and dominate in that market is also sort of undeniable, right? The fact that EU is going to continue to lead the world on a lot of things which are very core to the EU around human rights, around the regulation of tech, right? And around all the aspects which actually can make the world a better place, right? I'm a big supporter of the clean, there's a sort of clean energy and clean tech sort of areas, right? So all of those areas, essentially just mean that there is actually a lot more points at which we can converge, right? between the EU and India, right? We have a lot more convergence points. Yeah, there are divergence points that, that's true with every relationship. Now, so if we just focus and get these convergence points to play for us between the EU and India context and do that in a slightly more strategic manner, right? And we build this, thoughtfully, right? There's lots of tailwind, as it were, right, for this relationship to go to a completely different level, right? We already have a strong base. The good news when I saw the trade numbers is it's actually quite equitable. There's very little. Like if you think about the India-China relationship, right? It's a lopsided relationship. We import so much more than we export, right? And that's a big problem. But in the EU-India context, it's a very strong foundation, right? And there are lots of points on which we are completely aligned, right? And as long as we just get this working, right, I think we'll be doubling, tripling, maybe more, the amount of trade which we do with each other for the common good, right? That's the way I see it.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, it's clear there's an inevitability, as we've said in this discussion, about India's status in the world. There's inevitability of its population and its implications of the fact that it's producing, as we said earlier, 75% of the world's talent on advanced technology. That says a lot for the future. Says a lot for the future. And obviously, as you say, it's really important that we find and build, actually it's not about finding, actually build on the points of the obvious convergence that there are, some of which you have set out so extremely well. And I suppose as we move forward, we'll need to think about the role that companies like yourselves play. As a think tank, we are committed to developing a renewed social contract in Europe. And we hope that that also influences global relationships. But at the heart of that is about the different kind of roles, responsibilities, expectations, and I suppose accountabilities between private, public, and civil society and citizens. And I think what you've demonstrated here today, Ashish, is that actually if we worked closer with the private sector and included the private sector earlier on in the development of some of these responsibilities, regulations, and policies, we would actually fare better. That's not to say that in the past we've seen the private sector behave well. It's only recently we've seen, in the past decade or so, a better profit plus model, let's say a more socially conscious a corporate approach to trade and relations. But I think there's an opportunity for HCL in particular, given what you said here today, but other partners in India to, I suppose, match up with industries in Europe to create a different kind of approach. And I think sentiment is the issue here, but also foresight. So I really welcome you being with us here, Ashish, today. It's been great. Let's see what happens in the future in terms of the next 5 months. And I'm not a betting person, and I'm sure you're not. But what do you think the odds are? Or are you optimistic that we're going to move in the right direction?
Yeah, I think so. I think you used the word inevitable, right? So irregardless of the FTA or no FTA, right? The trajectory of the sort of both the parties is only more and more convergence, right? So, like I said, focus on where the convergence is.
Indeed.
Focus on where the outcome of the convergence is the most most beneficial for both EU and India, right? And if we just focus on that, right, and we use that as the pivot on which the new FTA is based, right, then some of the other areas where there's going to be obviously divergence, and I don't see that divergence going away, right, is something which can be managed or can be sort of handled, right? They're difficult topics, so they're going to get handled over a longer period of time. There are areas which can be done much more easily, much faster, right? And that's really what my hope is.
Excellent. So I think, thank you. It just shows you these conversations are good and important and potentially sparking thought, because you've come up with 2 excellent ideas around the notion of e-government and public services. And I say that because most of Europe's public sector is broke. Debt is huge. And there are huge conversations, the significant conversations taking place at the moment about how do you recover from that debt. And now with the energy crisis ahead of us, governments are having to think about their budgets and how do you deal with inflation. But technology as a driver for good can transform public services in a very significant way, but also the point you made about talent. I think there's a huge opportunity, you're quite right, about universities in both sides, let's say in Europe and India, creating, I suppose, more structured relationships. Let's say an EU-Asia Erasmus type of approach about skills and opportunities. And we might have given birth to an idea here, Ashish. But thank you very much for being with us. It's been a real
Thank you, Dharmendra, and thank you for the opportunity. Always, talking to you.
I hope so. And I hope that we are able to regroup when we hear what happens in the next 4 or 5 months. It's great to chat to you again, or also bring a couple of private sector players together to have a conversation about where we've got to and where we think we need to move in terms of the next year, which is going to be a tough year. Viewers, listeners, thank you very much for being with us. I'm Dharmendra Kanani, Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe. Thank you for spending time watching this. I hope you found it stimulating, thoughtful, and thought-provoking. India is an important player, as we know, regardless of what anyone says, it will be a global player, and it is a global player already. In the context of geopolitical relations, it is an evident and obvious sense that we should be moving in that direction in terms of partnerships, which are frank, open, but also recognizing the obvious convergences, and the issue of foresight is inevitable in terms of the role Europe and India can play. So keep an eye on our website for our next Critical Thinking Live, but also our other events that are happening as we move full force into our autumn season. Ashish, thank you very much again, and look forward to seeing you again and working with HCL.
Thank you. Thanks, Dharmendra, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Okay, take care, goodbye, and keep an eye on our website. Keep safe.